So now this is a bit outdated, but imagine you look at your church, and this survey was done a bit back, but let's see. No. So the percentage of born-again Christians tithing is actually about the same even now. It's like 13%. But as of beginning of this month, last time according to CNBC, about 58% of average Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 58. Beginning of the year, it was a little higher. CNBC said it was like 63, but now it dipped a couple more percent, where 58% of us Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, meaning if we lose our job, we're going to be in trouble. And as you may be able to guess, financial hardships create stress in marriage, right? I mean, it's no surprise. Financial reasons serve as probably one of the top 3 causes for divorce. Last Saturday, I was sitting down with a woman who was having a hard time in her marriage and financial challenges. This is no surprise, and maybe some of us are going through right now. I want to encourage you to find someone who can help you, journey with you. Find a pastor, talk to your pastor, or find a counselor if you can't. I think especially in the COVID, we've experienced, I guess, the ups and downs of the stress that comes along as financial security, quote unquote, becomes kind of like intangible, right? It's harder to feel secure just because there's so many unknowns, especially with job markets being laid off and the uncertainties of just so many factors. And we're so bombarded with this idea that the more stuff we have, we think we'll be happy, yet, I mean, let's face it, more stuff doesn't make us happy. It might distract us for a little bit, right? Kind of like you give a kid a new toy, they'll be entertained for a little bit, but how long does that last? We're just older versions of that. I wonder last time you kind of lost it when things just felt like out of control. 9 out of 10, it's often the ladies who call me. I'm talking about if they're married, and it's often, although not necessarily all the time, but more often than not, it's the wife who can't sleep because of their finances and trying to get the husband to get on board, to get help, to do things differently because whatever they were doing wasn't working. And it ranges in terms of how long will it take to get the husband to get on board to, like, because clearly this isn't working, but often husband is in a state of denial, and I get it, there's a lot of pride. We don't want to expose this part, right? Yet, you know, sometimes it takes a couple of months of prayer and fasting to get the husband to recognize, or one spouse to recognize we need help or things need to change, or else something else is going to give. Sometimes it takes years because we're prideful people, right? I don't want to show my weaknesses and my mistakes and even my sins with a deceit, even sometimes with finances. But these are just some of the things. And living in this part of the country, I think it's hard not to equate finance and financial success with self-worth. And I think as Christians, this is something that I come back to. We say our worth as a Christian has been fully displayed and proven on the cross. Yet, how often do we allow what we get paid to affect how much worth we feel? Again, checking the heart, right? Celebrate Easter, resurrection, yet when finances are hard, like it's really hard not to feel these things, right? But those are the moments that I find myself like, and I encourage my people to, hey, go back to the cross. What's your worth? Nothing speaks louder about your worth than what Christ did for you on the cross. No amount of paycheck. But the sad reality is this world says otherwise. So all the more, if I'm being like bombarded with these thoughts, that means I'm listening to the world more than to this book. It means I'm spending too much time on those social media reels than in this book. So just keep that in mind. We all want to be debt-free. We all want to save money. I mean, it doesn't take much for me to kind of relive some of those moments. And I wish I could say that moment that I shared in the last sermon was the last time. That was one time. It was one of the painful times. But there are other mistakes that actually cost far more because the price, the cost of mistakes actually continue to rise as we get older, right? And I think deep down, because we believe in the power of the gospel, we want to live a life of peace. Now, that life of peace, the shalom that the Bible speaks of, is not absence of all the chaos. Biblical peace comes in knowing that we are reconciled with our Heavenly Father through Jesus. And that needs to ground us. Yes, the world shakes. Economy goes up and down. Inflation. I was talking to somebody just now, like YJ, it's like eggs. Do you guys remember how much egg cost like 3 years ago? It's ridiculous. And like I have my eldest daughter's in college. I have two boys who are 17 and 15. They eat more than me. They eat a lot. They're always hungry. And it's crazy how much, it's like, seriously? But again, that's the reality. But how do we find this peace? Gospel peace, transcending all understanding, guarding our hearts is different from stress-free life that the world speaks of. So guard our hearts, brothers and sisters. But there are these things we believe from here, but as we reel through, or as we grew up living from our family of origin, what we've been told, what we heard, what we didn't hear, explicit, implicit things that we picked up affects how we think, how we feel about money. And I mentioned before, just like if you're an alcoholic, you watch out when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, right? Because those are the times when you're most likely to halt, right? Not any different with like, shopping therapy, where, after a long, horrible day, your boss screams at you, you want to do something and you swipe that now. You don't even have to swipe. You just put your phone and you just do this. So many frictions are removed. It's so easy for us to spend money. And this is perhaps one of the lies that we keep saying to ourselves. I'm not good with money. And you just kind of excuse yourself. It's like you're permitting yourself, I'm not good, so I can't get good, so I'm not going to work on it. That might be one thing. Or if you have kids, it's like, I have no time. And actually, I feel like I do have no time. But we always have time. Let's be honest, right? We always make time for things that are really important. It just means this is not a top priority. We'd rather stay the same. I don't like change. I like things around me to change, but I don't want to change myself. That's what it means, right? I want things in my life to change, but I want them to change without me changing. That's really what I want. But sanctification doesn't happen that way, right? Some of us, the B word is a very bad word. Yeah, it's like, don't say the B word. It's like, so then don't use the word budget. Cash flow plan. Or something. But we do need a budget. Now, how detailed should it be is a different story. Depending on your personality, if you're obsessive compulsive, you need Excel spreadsheets with 10 columns and you need to track everything, God bless you, you do that. But some of us, something simpler. Notepad, paper and pencil, that's fine too, as long as it works, right? But we say this all the time, I don't need a budget. Or because it's so tough, I think we might have said something like this during COVID especially, or more recently. I have no discretionary extra money. I just barely have enough for bills. But it actually goes with the next one. I don't make enough money to have a budget. This is actually so wrong. Now, if you live in this part of the country, and average income needs to be a little higher than the rest of the country. The cost of living in tri-state area is higher than Dallas or Texas or North Carolina. I mean, let's face it, house there and house here are just, you can't compare. But especially if you are not earning a certain amount, all the more reason you to budget, because every dollar will matter that much more. If you have more discretionary income or more income, you can mess up, but it'll give you a little bit of buffer. But if you don't make enough, you say that you don't make enough money to make a budget, that means you need a budget that much more, because every dollar needs to go that much further than someone else. I was telling someone who got laid off, it's really tempting to just keep the status quo as if nothing changed. But those are the times when you really need to, buckle down, cut expenses, and wake up. Because if not, you're gonna accrue debt very quickly, right? This chart gives two components. As Bible-believing Christians, we need a teachable spirit. We need to be humble enough to come to God's word. We need to be humble enough to seek Bible-believing Christians who are wise in their stewardship to guide you. So you need a teachable spirit. However, you need more than just teachable spirit. You need the character. You need the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. The last one, self-control. You need the discipline of self-control to really excel. You need both humility and teachability, but you need the Spirit to be working in you to discipline you so that you can actually follow through. If you're married, your number one accountability partner is your spouse, should be your spouse. You should be united. One might be a nerd, one might be a free spirit. That's okay. But you need to be doing together, or else if not, you're going to be, I see couples looking at each other. Yeah, so you can guess who I am. I'm the nerd. My wife is a free spirit. So, because if you're not rowing together in unison, what happens to a boat? You ever been in a boat where you're not rowing together? It just keeps spinning around, right? It doesn't go anywhere. You're exerting a lot of energy, but it keeps spinning around. It's just a lot of wasted energy getting nowhere. And that happens a lot to marriages because we don't talk, we don't pray together, we don't read scripture together, we don't worship together. Or we might, but at a superficial level, and when life gets busy and tiring, we stop. Singles, you're not out. So when you're married, you have someone who is naturally positioned to keep you accountable. When you're single, who looks at your statement when you do anything? You don't naturally have someone, right? So that means you have to work extra hard to find someone. You authorize that person. Hey, brother. Hey, sister. This is what God has placed in my heart in this season. I want you to keep me accountable to these things that God has placed in my heart. You authorize that person, empower that person to speak into you, and you talk about it. And you talk about how you're spending. and you enable them to look at some of your finances so that you have that accountability. It's harder. However, that's why you need to be extra intentional, because it doesn't happen naturally. Usually, in my experience, singles come to me for counseling. In my church, like financial counseling would be often when they finish college and are beginning to work for the first time. They have no idea. After they kind of like, woo, and they realize, oh, it's like, oh, like a reality check. But at the end, you need a plan. And that plan is your budget. And if you don't like the B word, you can say cash flow plan. It's the cup. Remember, it's a cup. It's not a bathtub. I don't think I have to worry about most of us wondering, oh, it's too small. It's like a thimble. No, I think usually it tends to grow naturally. So it has to be a cup, but it has to be intentional. It has to be thought through. It has to reflect the values and goals that the Lord has placed in your heart in this current season. Don't let life just happen to you. I was talking to a young sister who's realizing, say, oh, I'm spending too much money. I encourage, well, why don't you track your expenses? Okay, I'll track my expenses, then it'll all be better. No, tracking just shows after the fact. Why don't you first decide how you want to spend, and as you track regularly, you will see whether it aligns with your goals or not. How do you deal with financial blessings? How do you deal with financial setbacks? I think those things reveal a lot about our true priorities. Again, I'm not saying you can't enjoy blessings, but being intentional. Being intentional, because a lot of times financial blessings can become a curse. It can split up families if you're not prepared well. It could also make you lose sight of God if we're not careful, right? Because it's a heart issue. And at the same time, how about financial setbacks? And how do you respond? So let me look at a couple of things. So when your income increases, what are we going to decide? Our, raises come. How do you plan when raises come? Layoffs come. How do you anticipate? So in a very broad financial kind of toolkit, people say anywhere from 3 to 6 months is what you should save, depending on the nature of your work, whether it's single income, dual income, self-employed, depending on, you want to have minimum of 3 or between 3 to 6 months of living expense saved as your emergency fund is what typically people advise. If you're self-employed, I work with people who are like realtors. Real estate has been really tough in the past couple of years. Income is literally you don't know. Now, certain time of the year is generally a lull. Usually, winter to April, May-ish is April is the hardest time, and now it's supposed to pick up. So, if you're in that kind of industry, then you probably need close to a year's worth of income saved, because it's like riding a wave that you don't know how it's going to pan out, right? So how do you prepare for these sorts? Or, I'm sorry, question.
Where should we park these emergency funds?
So general rule of thumb with emergency fund, you're not trying to make money. It's like an insurance money, right? So I would generally say, if I were you, or I generally keep my emergency fund in a high yield savings fund or a money market fund. So money market funds are not FDIC insured, but usually they're pretty safe in terms of $1 ratio of safety. But probably right now, I think most high yield saving funds, saving accounts, probably give you 3.5 to 3.75, and mutual funds, money market mutual funds, I think they probably range from 4.5 to 4.75, depending on the ratio they also charge. But again, depends, what you feel more comfortable. High yield, FDIC insured versus money market, but you're not trying to grow wealth with it. It's like insurance. Why do you buy insurance? So that you can sleep well at night, right? So I'm not trying to make money. I'm just trying to sleep well, knowing the nature of the roller coaster ride that we are all riding. And especially, when we're going through health scares or health issues, like what are the things that we can do? How do you anticipate accidents? I don't know about you guys, but I think it was like a year ago, September-ish, there was a massive flood. We had a Bible study at our church. Our building was covered, flooded, so we couldn't escape. So we all slept at church. And then all the homes in northern Jersey, we didn't have flood insurance, and cars that got basically totaled because of the water. And I mean, that's like a black swan kind of thing in a way. It's hard to prepare for that, but we know something's going to happen. So how do we create margin? How do we wisely save? We don't know what's going to happen, but at some point, statistically speaking, something's going to happen. So, it's going to rain, so let's prepare an umbrella kind of thing, right? Gas price, I don't want to talk about gas price. So, but we need a plan. And the plan requires intentionality, right? And one of the things, when I work with people, one of the first things I tell people to do is you need to evaluate your situation. It's like people sometimes are too excited. It's like, I want to start budgeting. I want to get out of debt. It's like, whoa, calm down, slow down, slow down. Because oftentimes this is what happens. People want to jump to a budget, but they have no idea what they're spending or how much they're spending on what. They can come up with a budget, but that would be useless because it's not grounded in any sort of reality. You need a pulse. Has to somewhat reflect reality, right? So the first thing I encourage people to do is you track your expenses. So you track expenses for the first 30 days. And I tell them, get a notepad. Get a notepad, write your date, where you bought it, how much, and what. Super simple. Go analog. Actually, I think when you begin something for the first time, it's more helpful to go analog than go digital. Once you have developed the muscle, then I think I encourage to go a little more digital, ease into those kind of automated functions. But I think it's important. So you track your expenses, and it's probably the best thing to stay control of your spending because you're looking at where the money's going. I was playing basketball with my son, my middle son, last fall. He broke my ankle, and so I haven't been running. I'm doing more low impact exercise now, but I've been a runner for most of my life. So when I was running, running served as a kind of a keystone habit that triggers a lot of other good things. I would eat better, and my spiritual discipline would usually be better too. And keystone habits function like that. It triggers a lot of good things in general. But if I want to run, that means, and usually when I ran, it was early morning, I would have to get my gears ready, like what I'm going to wear, and all that ready when I sleep, to kind of remove any friction, to make it as easy as possible so that I have less excuse. So the vital behavior was making sure that I go to sleep no later than 10:30, 11 if I want to wake up at 5:36, because I need at least 6.5, 7 hours of sleep. I can say I want to run, but if I go to sleep at 12:30, I'm not going to run. It's just wishes. That's all it is. But the vital behavior is that, and the crucial moment is when the alarm hits, rings, right? I need to just get up and put the clothes on and just go out for the run. In personal finance, keystone habit, it's budgeting. When you budget, when you do your cash flow plan, a lot of other things begin to happen. And how do you, and the vital behavior to make that succeed is tracking. You track where the money's going so that you minimize surprises. And the crucial moment, and this is another hard part because everything is digitized. When was the last time you got a receipt for anything? It's like, yeah. I work hard to get receipts. It's actually extra work. It's like, can I have a receipt with that? Because it forces me to go in the mode of tracking manually. The tough part about automation is industry is, they're not stupid. When they remove friction, when the buying transaction becomes easier and easier, you'll just spend more and you'll track less. It's no accident, I'll talk about it later, why like McDonald's first spent millions of dollars to make more money selling Happy Meal when it was like, I don't know, $2.50 or $3.50, because they knew that average customer would spend about like 25% more when you buy on plastic. But now, it's like, who carries cash around, right? Believe it or not, I still do carry cash around. But I also have apps on my phone. If I want to, I'll just Apple Pay it. But it's so easy. And it's so hard to track because it's so easy to just dismiss. Pick a place at home. Don't make it difficult. Just pick a spot in your home. Whether for us, it's our bedroom. It's by our, it's top left for me. We have a little basket where we put our receipts. I make intentional effort to ask for receipt for everything. If they don't, I'll text it to myself or something, just so that I know where it is going. And eventually using like spreadsheet. Oh, by the way, if you're a church planter, email me. I have like slides, budgeting, not PDF, Excel for you and for your church. I'm part of a stewardship network. They share those resources, so I'd be more than happy to pass along, and you can customize it for your church, whatever. So all these slides, if you're a church planter, you can email me and I'll forward that to you. And just keep it simple, right? And be consistent. Just like you brush your teeth every day, you should, like a couple of times a day, at least when you wake up and before you go to sleep, that's the minimum. Like put into a normal pattern so that you track. I usually say do it either before or after brushing your teeth because, like something to trigger you, right? It's not that hard. It'll take you in the beginning, maybe a little longer, but it just take a couple of minutes at most. And something happens and you begin tracking your expenses. And one of the things that I'll ask my clients, like, what do you notice? It's like, wow. And this is like top number one. I didn't know I eat out so much. Now, COVID, not as much, but that's generally the biggest surprise. Or, wow, I didn't know I go to 7-Eleven so much. Or cafe this, or Dunkin' Donuts that, or Starbucks this. And they just didn't know. They knew they enjoy those things. They just didn't know how much and how often. And it does, once you get organized, it helps you, right? And just keeping it simple and easy. And this is what I was talking about, like, just date, who you paid, what you bought, and the amount. And one thing to keep in mind, and I think of Romans 12:2, our need to be transformed. The Bible teaches us not to be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be what? Transformed by renewing our mind, right? And that by testing, you may discern what the will of the Lord is, which is good and acceptable and perfect. So we tend to focus a lot on actions and results. I mean, for example, tendency is if I have no budget, so let me, get a budget. So we look at what we don't do and we immediately try to fix it through action. eventually we do need to act. There's an action that's going to be needed. But the most important thing is we do what we truly believe. If I don't budget, and I didn't budget for the first 10 years of my marriage, it means that I didn't really value the importance of it. I can say whatever I want, but my actions and the result of my actions reflect what I truly believe about whatever it is that I do or don't do. And we all have our issues of the money scripts growing up, especially. Maybe you saw your mom, your dad doing certain things, not doing certain things, talking about, not talking about. You just, it's like you don't talk about money. Just like maybe you grew up in a family that never talked about sex. It's like, shh. But by not talking about it, it teaches you something, right? It's like, ooh, this is kind of dirty. You don't talk about money. When in fact, guess what? Jesus talked about kingdom of God most. Number one thing that Jesus spoke about is kingdom of God. Number two, money. But we are so afraid of talking about money. We're stressed out about it. Maybe we feel inadequate. Maybe we just have different kind of things affecting us, right? So we need to renew our mind. We need to change our thinking to go back to the Word. Not listen just to what the world says about money. Although a lot of teachings about money from the world is based on biblical basic financial principles, but they leave out a lot of stuff. Like, whose is it? As if what? Financial independence? But by the way, I listen to a lot of podcasts and books on these things, so I see a value in it. But there's something fundamentally missing if you are living for financial independence versus living for the approval of your master. The goals are different. It's not independence. For us as Bible-believing Christians, we're not seeking independence. We need to grow in greater dependence to God who loved us, saved us, and calls us to live for Him. And how long do you track your expenses? Well, as long as you want to be financially free. To what extent do you need to track? It's going to be different. How detailed do you need to be? Again, that's going to differ by individuals and couples. But you need to track to a certain extent. Because if you don't, you're going to have surprises. You're going to realize, whoa, I spent all the money and I don't know where it went. Been there. I spent money I didn't even have. And, I don't know if anyone works in credit card industry here, but, credit card industry, they, that's how they make their money, right? They send us credit card applications hoping that we'll open it, we'll use it, and not pay the full balance so that they can earn interest on from us. One of the things that after, I tell my people to track their expenses for 30 days, I ask them to look at categories. It's like, oh, by this category, by that category, what do you see patterns of in the percentage? There are advisable, it's all about ratio, okay? Believe it or not, if you want to be doing well financially, at least by average, financial teachers, the ratio of your net income spent on your housing should be, ideal sweet spot is 25%, no more than 33%. But guess what? In tri-state area, average family unit spends more than 50% of their net on housing because it's so expensive. I forget where I read it, but it's actually more than 50% of net on housing in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Or maybe it was Pennsylvania. But categories and how much is all about ratio. It's not about the amount. It's not how much, but in proportion. We need to be faithful in proportion to what. And as you track, you'll see the difference between, well, when we're honest, what's a need and what's a want, right? And sometimes you have to make that hard decision. We can't always get what we want. And we're very good at convincing ourselves and convincing others, this is what I need, right? These artificially created needs that keep adding to our list. You know, advertising industry works very hard to create continually those artificial needs that we keep adding to our list, whether subscription of this or that or whatever else that we enjoy. We need to make the management simple, and as we continue we control better. These just are some of the categories of expenses, you know, your income, what it comes, and what we spend on food. I generally encourage people to separate a category of grocery versus going out. Because I think number one category that we tend to lose control is going out. And by going out, I means anything that's prepared. Pickup, delivery, dining in, they're all eating out in a sense that I'm not the one cooking. For some people, I encourage them because they spend so much money on coffee that they have a separate category. It's important to them. So this is the balance. You don't want to overcomplicate your budget so that it's like, oh, like so many categories, like I can't track it. But you don't want to simplify it so much that you don't know where the money is going, right? So number one thing, so if you lump together restaurants and groceries like this, you don't know whether 60% of your expenses are going out to restaurant versus grocery. But that's really important to know. And your giving, your saving, and your personal, now this is super simple budget, obviously. So so again, this is when you begin to categorize your expenses. And let me talk about some of the benefit of working with a spending plan. It does reduce waste. Ultimately, when you have a spending plan, when you have a budget, it does reduce waste and it allows you to be intentional with saving money. One of the most important things why I have people get their budget somewhat stable before they try to get out of debt or build wealth is this. If you don't know the size of your cup, you don't know how much you can afford to attack debt. If you don't know the size of your cup, you don't know what the extra is so that once you're out of debt, you can learn to invest. You need to know where your money is going. And sooner you control the size of your cup, sooner you can really attack your debt payment, and hopefully once you're out of debt, really begin to save wealth and be generous. But you need to know. You need to know the size of your cup. And as you do that, you can begin to eliminate financial surprises. And by the way, Christmas is not a surprise. But last time I checked, Christmas comes same time every year. But guess when people reach out to me the most? It's after Christmas. It's like, oh, Christmas really messed me up. Oh, again. Yeah, it shouldn't surprise us, right? Let's be real. One of the things I tell people with expenses like Christmas, I have a separate Christmas budget because last time I know it's coming, and just do the math broadly. Let's say if I spend $1,200 a year on Christmas gifts, what I'll do is divide by 12 and sock away $100 a month because I know. Now, this doesn't have to be exact. I don't try to stress over so much so that, okay, am I getting the exact number? I just don't want my cash flow to be so shocked that it's like, ooh, I don't know. I could be off by a little. That's okay. But I want to have an estimate so that things like this don't mess up my family. And then as you continue, it allows you to take corrective action because when you pay attention, things you measure, things you pay attention to, you see improvement, right? Things you don't measure, you don't see improvement because you don't know what to improve anyway. And it allows greater communication if you're married. It forces you to talk about it. So if you're married, and if you're the nerd, raise your hand if you're the nerd in the family. Raise your hand if you're the free spirit in the family. Okay. We're all somewhere in between. And singles, you could be a nerd, you could be a free spirit, but you kind of have to do it anyway. You play both parts, whether you like it or not. If you're the nerd in the family, you need to come up with a budget as you talk to your spouse. Free spirit, you have to say something. This is what I see all the time, and I'm guilty of this too. It's like I overly prepare, and I learned this when I was budgeting in the beginning stage of because you have to speak into the budget, change a few things so that you can both say, this is our budget. Well, that's your budget, not mine. No, the Bible says two become one. I know it's hard to be one before God, but we still function as two separate people, right? But God has made us one, and that means we need to be united. We need to be rowing together, rowing in unity. And if you're single, you're united right now, but you don't have the accountability. You need to be extra vigilant in praying, asking for wise counsel, and seeking accountability in that way. I talked about this before. Spending is spiritual. Because if God owns it all, then when I'm spending it, I'm using His resources, right? So every spending transaction, if you think about it, is a spiritual action. Proverbs, if you want to study, has a lot to learn about finance. This is like your budget 101. Know well the condition of your flocks. I mentioned before, back in those days, you measure wealth by the animals you own, right? How many camels you have, how many cattle you own, and give attention to your herd, for riches do not last forever. We need to pay attention. We need to know what we're responsible for, right? If you're a shepherd, you need to know how many sheep you have. And if one wanders away, you need to go look for it. God gives us whatever resource. We need to make sure we know what's there and pay attention to it and make sure we are what? Productive with it, right? Like the parable we looked at. Every financial decision is a spiritual decision. This is an old Saturday Night Live episode. It's a basically, mocking our culture of buying things on credit when we don't have money. This brings back sad memory for me, so I'm going to continue. Facts about debt. Well, I was having a conversation with some young folks yesterday. They're asking me, church young folks, it's like, Pastor Paul, I was going to buy something and PayPal was going to give me an option to pay back in 4 increments, no interest. That's a good deal, right? Why would they do such a nice thing? I told them I'm not familiar with that particular, but I know PayPal is not the only company. I think a lot of credit cards are doing that too. But at the end, I said this. When we owe money to someone, we're presuming a couple of things. We're presuming our future, that we'll still have work, that God's going to be gracious to us in that way. He may not. And that also means when we have debt, even if it's interest-free, that means my future income is already accounted for. I don't have the freedom. Sure, I'm not paying more, but my future income that's going to come is already going to be accounted for because I'm already enslaved. Yes, I'm not paying extra fees, or you might be paying extra fees because usually that's how they make money. But that's something we need to recognize. There is a cost when we are in debt. We are enslaved to the one who lent us the money. Debt gives us stress. I remember trying to pay back not only those credit card debts, but paying off student loan. I think right now, student loan is still something that is pretty overwhelmingly stressful. But that means basically we are enslaved to someone else, as Proverbs reminds us. And Proverbs 22:7 reminds us the rich rules over the poor, and here the borrower is slave to the lender. Sometimes I find myself feeling ashamed knowing the price Christ paid to set me free, yet thinking about not just that incident, but when we look at our lives, how many excuses I make to re-enslave myself because I can't, I say I can't like not have that right now. That actually reveals a couple of things. It kind of delays solving the inner problems of the heart. And some of those things, like I mentioned, growing up, different money scripts we kind of picked up with our family of origin. And I think the biggest thing is just not learning to be content. And it is something we have to learn. We don't naturally have it. Again, we naturally covet things. That's why God, if you think about all the commandments, the 10th commandment is really kind of bizarre. Everything else is pretty, like, especially, you shall not murder. Okay, that's pretty, clear. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Okay, I mean, these are, don't give false testimony. And the 10th one, it's like, don't covet your neighbor's stuff. It's like, it happens in the heart, right? Yet, God knows that you and I are prone to wander away in coveting things that we don't have. All the more reason to learn how to be content with God. That He's in control, and He has the best plan for us. Let's face it, it's hard not to compare. It's like, but God, he, she, they, why? Been there. Still do that times. When I'm hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. It's like, oh, but God. That is a symptom of our hearts. Our lack of contentment and trust. That our Creator, our Savior, our Master has the best plan for us. I think I wrestle with the tension. How do I be productive, yet still live in contentment? I think that's something I'm still figuring it out, because being productive requires me to do things, learn new things, and bear more fruit, right? Yet how do I still learn to grow in contentment, like Apostle Paul says? This dude is in prison. He's going to die any minute. Who knows? And he's able to say, I can do all things. Even as I'm sitting in this prison wall, I can rejoice in the Lord and share the gospel. Yes, there are times when I had a lot, and I was able to rejoice in that. But now I have nothing. I can still praise the Lord in that. Taxes. Well, let me talk about this. So let's say hypothetically you earn $40K, and you're used to spending $1,000 extra. After 10 years, you've amassed $10,000 of extra debt, right? And that extra $10,000, let's say, this is kind of conservative, to be honest, it's earning an interest of 10%. Oh, by the way, I think in the announcement thingamajig, it says you'll learn what the difference is with APR and APY. I wasn't going to, but APR, annual percentage rate, versus APY, annual percentage yield. If you notice, companies that are trying to sell you to invest emphasize APY because it tends to be a little higher, especially longer the duration, right? People who are trying to make you borrow money from them emphasize APR because it tends to be lower. But you can Google that. By the way, I mean, I don't have any affiliation with Investopedia, but if you have like things you want to learn, I think that's a place you can go to look up things like that more. But let's say you've accrued $10,000 debt, you're earning, well, you're not earning, you're paying 10% interest. So annual, this is interest that you're paying is $1,000. How much lifestyle do you have to cut to get out of this mess? So before you spent $1,000 extra, now in order to get out, you're gonna have to basically triple the amount of effort, meaning you're gonna have to reduce your lifestyle by 1,000. You need to, pay interest of 1,000 and principal of 1,000. So you've been spending 41. Now you're gonna have to spend 38 to begin to knock this out. It's not an exact math, but the point is, it requires a lot more effort, and it's hard. I don't think it's this hard, meaning, the amount of energy, fuel that spaceship needs to utilize to launch out, but it takes far more effort to get out of debt than to get into debt. You can kind of wander your way, kind of find yourself into debt without that much effort. But you can't just walk out of that. It's going to require you to run hard. It's that time of the year where now I need to do lawn maintenance at my home. It's getting warmer. I'm going to have to probably cut it Monday. And this isn't my home, but we have weeds too. I have weeds. And I have one of these. They call them weed whackers, right? What I usually do, I have a lawnmower and then go around the trim, weed whacking, but I still don't have one of these. Do you know why? Because they take so much more time. Because this requires you to hunt down each weed and go down to the root and dig it out to get this. It will take a lot more effort, but yeah, that shows our tendency, my tendency, to just work on the superficial, not the root of the problem. Debt is a superficial display of what's going on in the heart. My inability or refusal to trust God. That what I have right now, Paul, be content. Is it possible that God wants you to be content right now? I don't think it's a possibility. It's what he commands us to. Trust him, right? Yes, be productive, but trust him. Seems contradictory, but Bible actually leaves us in a lot of places of tension. Trust me, but work hard. Be at peace. Fear not, but be productive for the kingdom. I want to just pause for a sec. I want to ask you, what kind of money script did you grow up listening at home? What did you see? One of the first things I ask, like people I work with, is, what is your earliest money memory growing up? Like, it could be with your mom, your dad, your sibling, it could be one of your family members. Was it a positive memory? Was it negative? And you bring that to God. Because oftentimes we remember the extreme emotional things, the really painful ones and really joyful ones. But I think the painful ones stick harder than the joyful ones. I tend to forget the joyful ones, and I think that's probably why God reminds his people, remember, remember, set up these things, remember what I did, remember, remember, remember. But the painful ones, I don't have to work very hard to remember. And I want to just give us a moment to maybe, if you're feeling tired and sleepy, maybe don't close your eyes, but just take a moment, just bring it to the Lord. How can you grow in contentment? How can you be productive? What does it mean for you to grow as a steward before God, but still be content? What does that look like in your life right now? How's the Lord challenging you to grow in prayerfully deciding on the size of your cup? How is the Lord encouraging you to grow in generosity? It's one thing for someone, and all of us can do this, it's one thing for me to be generous once, but that's not very hard. But I believe stewardship is a spiritual discipline. And any discipline, like anyone who plays sport, anyone who plays an instrument, anyone who does anything regularly in a high level way, we know that it requires consistent effort, right? Spiritual discipline of financial stewardship requires us to do that. So I'm going to give us 30 seconds, just kind of come before the Lord, and I'm going to continue. Let's see. As we continue, is anyone around age 65? Or who's closest to age 65? And don't feel ashamed. Come on. All right, so you guys want to do rock, paper, scissors? So this is freed up in later life, planning now beyond 65. So rock, paper, scissors, and shoot. Ty, rock, paper, scissors, and shoot. Come on. Rock, paper, scissors, and shoot. Come on. Do you see a pattern here? Use some psychological warfare here. No, just kidding. Okay, rock, paper, scissors, and shoot. Ah. There you go. You won, right? There you go. All right. I got two more. One's just more generic, freed up from debt. So this is kind of helping you get out of debt. And this is the other book. So I'll come back to that. So let's look at common type of debt. I mean, the school loans. I think now, more than ever, people are beginning to rethink about the value of, school loan. And I encourage you to keep on thinking about that as does it make sense to go into an inordinate amount of debt to get a degree that really might both overwhelm you and not prepare you for your future? So I think we need to be wise because we don't want this, right? But I think this is something that a lot of people actually do share with me. Young professionals, they sometimes tell me I regret because they didn't know better. It's like, I don't know if you remember back in those days, but we don't think about those kind of consequences. So I think if you are in high student loan debt, again, you do have to be aggressive in taking action. Just as this is probably one of the biggest financial commitment for most young working professional. Again, be intentional in coming up with a written plan, And I generally encourage you to stop adding more new debt. So that's the thing. Like, if you're trying to get out of debt, and if you are committed to getting out of debt, one of the things that we're tempted to do is rationalize like the new debt. But again, if the goal is to get out of debt, that means you do have to draw a line. Because once you make one exception, you'll make the exception again. And you have a higher chance of spending beyond your means. Crisis, we talked about this. Medical expenses, probably I think is number one why people go into bankruptcy. Divorce is another very expensive, painful experience that many go through. I encourage you to speak with your pastor, or encourage people to speak with pastor to get counseling for married folks who are wrestling. And I think we are experiencing this more and more, getting laid off. This is it's hard. Obviously, all of these things are hard. But when you're going through these kind of financial crises, the most important action is to be aggressive in budgeting. There's a desire to kind of maintain the status quo. It's like, let's try to keep things as normal as possible. But if you stay as normal as possible, meaning keep all your expenses as normal as possible in those seasons, that means later on, the debt's gonna go up. So, like I said, ideally you would have some savings, but again, I know during COVID or now, a lot of people in certain industries right now, for me that I work with, that I talk to, especially in the whole comp sci, as many layoffs are coming in larger industries. It's like, dude, wake up, get your act together, even as you are looking for work. And seek counsel, get help, learn. If you don't like to read books, believe it or not, most financial literacy books are also available in audio format. I probably listen to most of my books on Audible. Just a side plug, I don't know any of you guys live in a town with a public library that participates in Hoopla, but Hoopla allows you to borrow anywhere from 5 to 20 books per month. So you have digital access to ebooks, audiobooks, and they have a lot of books there that you can learn. How much time do I have? It's like,
You got plenty of time.
okay. So lifestyle debt, this is like really old picture, but living in a home that is beyond your means, I think is something, and this is probably the biggest percentage of expense, right? So when we think about looking at our budget and you try to cut expenses here and there, it helps, but if the biggest category of expense is out of control, like your housing, you do need a long-term plan to ease that. The biggest expense is usually housing. Most tri-state residents spend over 50% of income on housing. So if you can lower that, it's always harder to move down, right? Once you live in a nicer place, it's hard to come down. So just slowly go up, as slowly as possible. It's about proportion. You don't want to be house poor, meaning you want your house to be a blessing. And if you're stressing out because you're spending an enormous amount of money proportionally in housing, then it might be worthwhile to reconsider if, in whatever season of life you are, to reduce the housing expense that's typically disproportionately the highest in most of us. So in terms of action-wise, again, it's really, you begin with your thinking. So we tend to, I think as parents, like, so for example, when we are parents, we think about our kids. Believe it or not, so I live in northern Jersey for about 20 years now, and people would say this: as a single income earner with 3 kids, my wife raising 3 kids, the only thing we can really control was the housing. So we got into our current house 10 years ago, but for the first 10 years of a marriage, we spent per month no more in Bergen County, New Jersey. Okay, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bergen County, New Jersey, but we spent no more than $1,050 with 3 kids. So for a season, we just, believe it or not, 1 bedroom with 3 kids, and then they get a little older, 2 bedrooms with 3 kids, and then, but when they're super young, they don't know better anyway. They really don't. They don't remember anyway. So it's a question of, but I know there are people who say, oh, I can't live that way, or I can't live like that, or there. But it's a question of controlling your highest percentage expense. What can you do? So go up slowly. It's always harder to come down. So, my encouragement is to think about, who are we trying to impress? How can we live in a way that makes sense for our family? Now, my story is my story. I'm not saying you should do what I did, but it's an example of what can be possible. But the biggest reason that worked is because my wife was fully on board. She's the one raising 3 kids at home. I'm coming from church and other things. She spent in that size home, basically 24/7. And because she knew that by doing so, that was the only way we can save money to buy a house. So there's a goal, there's a cost. It's not forever. We didn't know how long we had to wait. We knew we had to wait for a while. So we had to do that for 10 years. But there was a goal, and when that opportunity came, we were positioned to do that. I want to just fast forward a couple of things in terms of, I said this before, I think the perspective about debt, this is an important thing to keep in mind. As long as we have debt, and I still have debt, I still have a mortgage. I don't know how long that's going to take. Well, actually I do because of the term, but when we have debt, it's like someone coming in and stealing money from your wallet. Meaning, like I said before, as long as we have debt, our future income is accounted for. But when we save, it's the opposite. I'm the kind of person who struggles with trusting or sleeping better at night with a certain amount of saving. And for me, one of the things that I have to confess that my wife challenges is to learn to be more generous. Because of my family origin, my struggle is trusting more in what you may have saved than truly trusting in peace with what God promises. How do we grow in generosity? I grow by letting it go, because like I said, the longer I hold on to it, the more attached I become. So I start with the tithing 10%, recognizing the first principle is what I begin. And the more I struggle with feeling anxious about money, the more I need to obey in actually finding gospel spreading opportunity to let go. Because and people talk about, oh, how much you need to retire, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. How do we live in a way that is meaningfully practical, but not so obsessed in a way that we're just driven by all the numbers of this world? I think I want to encourage you to continue to examine your heart. When YJ talked about doing a whole day long, one of the things that I was going to do was on money scripts. Our emotional relationship with money, because believe it or not, a lot of what I do is really less about math, but more about the way emotion kind of triggers and basically messes us up. Because this is not difficult math, let's face it, right? But we are complex people with a lot of baggage, and different things trigger us. We're not that unpredictable, but yeah, I just want to make a comment on that. So, cost of plastic, I mentioned this before, we spend more. So if you find yourself spending more than what you want to as you track, I would encourage you to create friction. So one of the best way to create friction, so industry removes friction to make us spend more, okay? The ease, Amazon one, remember when they had that? Like, they know exactly what they're doing. And, so you want to add friction so that you are more intentional. It's like, do I really want to spend money? Not like spend money and then, regret. But add friction to places that you need to control, that you want to control. I'm not a hardcore, so I'm a Ramsey coach. And if you know anything about Dave Ramsey, he's like, credit card is like from hell, and you should use debit card. And if you're that kind of person who's not disciplined and will spend more, you should just use cash and debit card. There are pros and cons of debit card. Debit card doesn't have the kind of protection that credit card does. But if by having credit card you go into thousands of dollars in debt, then paying a little bit of fees and costs of having debit card and the inconvenience of some of the limitation of debit card is worthwhile. If you're the kind of disciplined person who only spends on what you need and fully pay at the end, then I'm okay with you using credit card, because you're not enslaved to using credit card. Because that means you have the money and you're just using that to pay it off, right? Add friction, come up with your debt payment plan. Typical way that I talk about debt payment, unless you're like a super nerd and emotion doesn't affect you, there's like a 2% population who are like super nerds where they just do it. Most of us don't function that way. We need encouragement. Like, I eat healthier now and I want to see result. When I see result, whether losing weight or gaining muscle, it encourages me to keep at it, right? If I see no result, like, how long do I keep this up? It's going to discourage me, and like, I'm not going to keep doing it. Getting out of debt is similar in a sense that that's small. You list your debt smallest to largest, regardless of the interest rate. So people who are super math nerds, they say, no, you should pay off the highest interest rate. Yes, mathematically, that makes sense. But we don't get into this trouble because we are mathematical wizards, right? And most of us, 9 out of 10, we need the encouragement. I need to see a win. So regardless of the interest rate, you pay the minimum in all, and you attack the smallest. So once the smallest is paid, it creates a snowball. Now you have a bigger snowball because what was used to spend on, so before gets added once that gets knocked out and begins to apply to the next one. And by the time you come to the biggest amount, snowball has grown quite a bit, and it continues to encourage you. It doesn't make mathematical sense, but it makes psychological sense because we are spiritual beings who need psychological wins to keep doing what we're doing. And there's some spreadsheets with that. I'm gonna end with this. Again, contentment. I think this is probably one of the most important things we all need to learn, as Apostle Paul spoke of. We are driven by these sort of external yards. And if you're honest, and I think in my strong moments I can be honest, It's our desire to impress others, grow in greater self-esteem. Like, I want to be better than my neighbor. These are the external yards that our culture promotes, right? Now, this is about buying cars, but it's about anything, actually. When we buy anything, why do we want a certain brand? Why do we want certain service? It's like, what's motivating me? Why do I want to carry a certain thing? Why do I feel the need for someone to recognize that I have this thing? As a good steward, again, it doesn't mean we can't have nice things, but it has to make sense for where we are in our current season, right? A general rule of thumb with cars, for example, ideally, if you make $100,000 a year gross, the total amount of car in your family should not exceed more than 50% of your gross income. Meaning, value of all the things that have motors in your home should not exceed $50,000. It's better if it's lower than 50%. We need vehicles to move, but it has to make sense. If you can keep it lower than 15 to 20%, that will be really good. But I know people who earn $40,000 a year and driving a $50,000 car. You can't win financially. That makes absolutely no sense financially. If you earn $50,000 a year, that means you probably should drive about a $10,000 to $15,000 car proportionally. It's all about proportion. It has to make sense, okay? And we need to have the courage to ask ourselves, like, what's driving my internal need versus external need for approval, right? Does it meet our needs? Is it a good value? Does it make sense financially? Leave me free from guilt. State requirements, so, okay. So these are some basic things, whether we're buying a home, which has huge financial commitment, right? I advise people to come up with these things when they begin to get their budget in order. You need an offensive and defensive plan, right? So you can't decide when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So you need to come up with a defensive plan before that. You decide, so it's not the amount that matters, but it's basically, the concept is, it's one thing if you budgeted for it, meaning you thought about it, you talked about it, and you did some research. But if you have an out of whim desire to purchase something, I encourage couples, individuals to do this. Let's say if it's a $500 purchase that you haven't planned, that you are kind of getting ready to impulse buy, take 5 days to think and pray. If it's a $100 out of whim purchase, just wait a day. If it's a $5,000 or more, wait a month. The point isn't how much. The point is being intentional about, if this isn't something that you actually thought about, planned, and in your moment of weakness, you're like, ooh, being tempted, then it's good to have a plan. You decide how much you think you need to wait for a day. It could be $50, $100, $250, whatever. You decide what's important enough to wait for a week. It could be $500, $1,000, it doesn't matter. And you decide, because believe it or not, this happens sometimes. People are tempted to go into a car dealer and want to buy a car, just like that, walk out. It's like, slow down. You are about to make a $50,000 commitment, because the difference is $100 mess up. I mean, it's still $100, but it's not going to take you a huge amount of effort to dig out of that. But obviously, the larger the commitment and the mistake, if it is a mistake, getting out of a $50,000 mess and a $500,000 mess, it's a lifestyle change for a long time. So be prayerful, have a defensive plan. No one's going to tell you, but if you're married, that's something that you and your spouse need to talk about. hey, we have a tendency to blah, blah, blah. Let's decide. So that's one defensive plan. Talked about this. Some ways that we blow money at the end of a horrible day when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, right? Be careful. How you celebrate a bonus or a raise, be intentional. How we, when you get a tax refund, getting a big tax refund is not a good thing, guys, by the way. It means you're giving Uncle Sam like a big free check for a long time without interest. Opening those like spam mails that says sale, or now they text you stuff, or social media, just again, and another one, moving into a new home. Be careful. 5 powerful forces affecting our decision. Our desire for more money, need for security, striving for title and prestige, craving power, personal selfishness, just to list a few. At the end, it's, again, checking our hearts. Checking our hearts. Fixed expenses, variable expenses, lifestyle choices. Fixed expenses are easier, obviously. Taxes, unless you're working for yourself, like a realtor, then that's different. But anyway, they tend to be, if you're a W-2, easier. Medical expenses, debt, if you have payments, you should be, be fixed in setting the amount, right? And when extra income comes, you could attack it with those things. Basic housing costs tend to be, I don't know, actually they're fixed because things always break and they're not so fixed. I have to just fix them, that's the problem. Variable expenses, also, like I said, typically I would, I pay my auto insurance just lump sum once a year. So that means every month I'm socking away a couple $100 because November comes, I know I'm gonna pay the whole thing. So whatever you have that's a variable expense that you pay like annually, quarterly, it's gonna come, like taxes, for example, whatever, just expect it, budget it. Utility, cell phone, I hate cell phones. I think, you kind of have to have it, I guess they say. There are other ways you can actually, I've used to be with Verizon for the longest time. Now I went to Total Wireless, but now I think Verizon bought out Total Wireless. So it's like, hello. Yeah. Be careful when you budget for clothes. Typically, I have young boys who are growing. We go to shopping for clothes typically twice a year before school and certain other time. So, we typically try to guess how much we spend a year, and again, divide by 12, and we sock away. Some months we won't spend money on kids' clothes, but we know when certain time comes, we'll need to spend it. So we're not gonna just use that later for something else, but eventually we know we'll need to spend it. It's like that with car fixing too. I have 2 used cars. We know at some point they're gonna need work, so we sock away a certain amount, knowing that at some point at the year, something needs to get replaced, so we have some money. I just don't want my budget to be so out of whack so that I'm not ready for anything. So those are the things that you wanna minimize. Gifts, again, like this is a hypothetical. Let's say you have 5 siblings and 4 parents. Be intentional. Like birthdays are at the same time, anniversaries are at the same time, Christmas is the same time, right? These should not be surprises. So come up with something, add them all up, divide by 12, and sock away. Now, certain categories, believe it or not, I sock away in cash, just because it's easier for me. There are different companies. I think Ally Banks allows you to put in buckets. So there are ways you can do it, but you need to find something that works for you. But with things like this, certain things I encourage people to have a cash envelope. Number 1 will be going out to eat, believe it or not, because that's the hardest category for people to control. So that's one thing. Other things that we also put away in cash would be like fixing my car, or just categories that make sense for you to just set aside with clarity of boundaries. Lifestyle choices, this is probably the biggest driver that affects your personal finance, okay? Because cars we drive, right? This is probably, I think car cost has gone up. I think last time, like a couple pre-COVID, like average car cost was probably like $575 a month. I think now it's like 700. I forget. Don't quote me on this, but it's gone up. Average car cost. So after housing, car cost is probably up there. You know, buying a nice car versus a reasonable car. Again, I don't know the nature of your work. Certain work requires nicer car, but there's always ways that you can figure out that works for you, right? Because if you take clients and you need a certain car, whatever. But in addition, you know, I'm generally not going to encourage you to buy a brand new car unless you're like a straight up millionaire or you work in a car company that gives you so much advantage. Leasing is probably one of the worst way you can get a car. Leasing is fleecing. Because you're paying for the greatest depreciation. So best way is to buy, I think, 1 to 2 or maybe 3-year used car that's in good condition, and you drive till it breaks and you can't drive anymore. And let someone else pay for the depreciation. Buy or lease, yeah, I mean, I've said enough. Entertainment is another big component that we can pay attention to, whether going to sports games, to shows, etc. Going out to eat, that's like, I've said enough of that. Vacation, people, you know, this is what, April, right? I know people who are still paying for their vacation that they went last year. So again, go on vacations you can afford, not on credit card. I'm not against, I think we should be spending time with our loved ones, but you shouldn't take vacation with you for the rest of the year. Just, you know, enjoy it. And that means you need to save for it, right? Same thing, if you, whatever, like, you know, in a family of 5, family of 4, if you spend $3,000, $6,000 for your family vacation, divide by 12 and sock it away, because you know when that time of the year comes, you have the money instead of, oh, we need to go, but we don't have the money. Oh, let's just charge it. And so it's like a cycle, right? You charge it, you go on the vacation, and it follows you around the whole year, reminding you what you did, and then you manage to pay off, and you repeat the cycle all again. Don't do that. Housing costs, again, this is the biggest proportion, so control it. There's no point in trying to nickel and dime and coupon every little thing if you are getting the biggest category wrong. So this is going to move you the most. So pay attention. Shopping for clothes. Fixed needs. I'm going to just close with a couple of suggestions, practical suggestions. So automate certain things like that are beneficial. Like I automate my mortgage, things like that. Certain things you put in cash. I think for me also, these 3 things definitely and more: clothes, gifts, car maintenance. I have a separate category for Christmas gifts, Christmas season, New Year, because that's a beast of its own. Christmas gifts, Christmas party, traveling, and regular gifts throughout the year. So whatever makes sense. Don't overcomplicate things because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. Start smaller and get more complicated if you want to. Keep it simple, one step at a time, and debiting other things. Yeah, I mean, variable needs, same amount. Don't go crazy when you see you're going to have good months, bad months, meaning good months when you don't spend, bad months when you're going to spend more. But for the most part, the whole point is to save regularly enough so that it averages out, right? Lifestyle choices. It comes back to your spending plan, the key. Remember, you need a budget, you need to track it, be intentional, be prayerful, or else you're going to fight with your spouse. It helps to write. It helps to write your goals, okay? The famous, average American doesn't have $1,000 in cash for emergency. I don't know if that's true, but it always helps to have some cash when something goes awry. So, and if you are under extreme financial duress, or you know people who are under financial duress, protecting the four walls is what I advise. Meaning, you stop doing everything else. Basic groceries. So some people are under so much financial duress, but they still want to pay their credit card. It's like, oh, I can't not pay. Dude, just don't worry about your credit card bill. Pay for food for your family. I'm not talking about going out to eat. I'm talking about pay for groceries, okay? Basic clothes. I think most of us, we don't need more clothes. So I think generally we're okay with that, with some exception. We need basic housing. We need shelter, right? We need electricity. It's getting hot. We need AC. Or we need basic transportation. So those are basic four walls you need to have so that you can kind of get back on your feet again, right? But when that's happening, other things should be paused. And those are the basic four walls. We continue to give up to the Lord. I think there's one final. So we tend to, or we live in a culture that tells us to kind of live it out, like lifestyle. But the Bible calls us to honor Him by tithing first, saving second, and be content with the rest that we have and live accordingly. We are bombarded with advertising in the culture that says, get more, right? We have desires that we're not even aware of in our moments of weakness when we are sad, angry, lonely, or tired. And we continue to compare ourselves with our neighbors, with the Joneses. And because if we function this way, we leave saving. If we get to save anything, we sometimes can't, and we can't give because we haven't prioritized. Bible speaks of tithing as the first tenth. It's not the last tenth. I have to keep telling my kids. My kids are 19, 17, and 15 and a half, but I have to tell them, if you're going to tithe, you got to tithe first. Because there's a difference between tithing your 10% last versus tithing 10% first. If you think about Genesis, the offering that, let's say, Abel gave is about giving the first sheep. And when you give the first sheep to God as an offering, that means you're going to trust God's going to provide you with the rest. It's a statement of faith, recognizing that everything belongs to God. The Lord's anyway. It's offering that is above and beyond. And we're saying, I'm trusting you, Lord, so I'm going to give first, and then I'm going to save for my future, and I'm going to learn to be content and live with the 80% that I have left. Because if we don't do that, we usually just try to live out our lifestyle, and we try to save and we try to give, and there's usually nothing left because our priorities are discombobulated. This is Compass Matt, but I'm going to close with that and maybe field any questions.
Yeah, we got a few minutes. If you have a question, now would be a great time for that.
Yeah. Questions, comments? Oh, let me hand out this one. So this is get out of debt, kind of freed up from debt? Who would like, who did not already get something, this resource? 1 DVD and 3 workbooks. One person? Hey, there's only one person. That means it's you. I don't see anyone else. Hey, congrats. Okay, any questions? Question? Oh, you want the book? Okay, we'll do the book at the very end. Question?
So for a person who would want to create a budget, but grew up never understanding what a budget actually is, where do you begin outside of tracking expenses?
Well, first of all, any of your pastors or church planters who want the sample budgets, you can ask them, because I'll send it to them if they request it. So you have samples to use. But there are a lot of budgeting apps. One that I use with my wife is a free version of Every Dollar. So it gives you the categories and it breaks down. So like when I encourage people to budget, you need to think about categories of expenses. So the first one is really, I start with giving, then I have housing, then I have cars, transportation, I have food. Under food, I have groceries, and I have restaurant or anything that you buy that's prepared to eat or drink, right? You have, I have insurance categories, I have like entertainment category. For me, we also have hospitality and generosity categories. So, and then miscellaneous. I have kids, so we have education expenses with college and all that fun stuff. And if you have debt, you'll have debt. So, so you want to think about categories, and ideally there are different ratios that you want to be spending per category to have like kind of a balanced life. But again, personal finance is personal. So if something is really important to you, you can spend more. That just means that you have to spend less than something else, right? But if you have no idea,
Yeah, because I'm a single mom and I have 4 children.
so if you want to learn how to budget, I think for you, check out the Every Dollar app. I think it's better than Mint in that a lot of people use Mint, but they use Mint more to track than to budget. So, you need to track, but before tracking, you want to be intentional in setting your value with what you have, right? So I would check out Every Dollar. Yeah, great question. Anyone else? There was hands over there. No?
I have a question.
Yes.
What type of advice towards budgeting would you give when mega markets like Amazon cross over multiple areas within your budget? So I'm guilty of buying household goods and other expenses all from the same one vendor, and then how do I allocate that appropriately in my budget?
Yeah, that's a challenge for us too, because we buy a lot of things from Amazon too. I think, so usually what my wife and I do is usually once a month. This is not, we don't do this on a daily basis. Once a month, my wife would look at our Amazon statements and she would look at what category of expense it is. So that for us, it's typically either like, we don't buy food. It's usually like kids related, detergent related, or household related. Actually, it's about everything. So we don't try to lose sleep over like everything. So we do have a category that's personal. So as much as we can, like if it's clearly this is like a household thing, we look at our budget and try to apply it. So it is hard, and I think that's the genius of Amazon. They sell everything and anything, and it is harder to track because you don't have a receipt. So you just have to look at your like purchase history, and whether you do it once a week, once a month. I think once a month might be rough because it might feel overwhelming depending on how many things are coming your home. But I would probably start with like once we look at the list and begin to track where the money is going by what category. Because I think the challenge is if you don't know what category expenses you're spending money on, it's really hard to pay attention. Because a lot of times when I work with people, they have they just lump it miscellaneous and everything goes there. And it's not as helpful when you have a lump expense of like $1,000 of miscellaneous and you don't know, you can't say what that is, right? So you want to be as vigilant as possible without driving yourself crazy of overly micro following everything. I don't know if that helps.
At least we have similar problems, so I know that. I'm not alone.
But you don't want to just leave it alone. You do want to have an idea, right? Any other questions?
Are emergency funds and savings synonymous?
Usually not. Savings, so it depends how you're using it. But most people use the language of emergency fund for example, I use the language emergency fund as a living expense in case of a disaster. People usually use the language of savings for something that's specific. But it doesn't have to be. It could be synonymous. So you could have an emergency fund that also serves as a saving that's kind of lumped together. So as long as you know what it's supposed to do. So the key is, do you know why it's there? So I usually encourage people to save with a purpose because it gives you focus. Save with a purpose because it gives you focus. It gives you a sense of win. And if you don't decide what it's for, sometimes it also disappears. So usually the things that I encourage people to save for replacement cost is usually a car, because at some point you're going to have to replace a car. Saving for a car is going to be very different from saving in case you get laid off, right? It's a different category. This is something that's going to happen eventually at some point. So saving for a car, you own a home, something's going to break down. Something always breaks down in my home. So I need to have a saving for my home maintenance. Typically, it's at least 1% of your value of your home is average cost of fixing up, maintaining your home. So you have saving for a car that eventually will get replaced, saving for a home that needs renovation when things break down. If you have a separate category of you want to buy a home or investment later, saving for that. So it does help to assign a specific purpose, then lump it all together in one account, because then it's hard to know, and it's hard to know when it disappears what it went for. So I don't know if that makes sense.